On Capitol Hill.
Hey guys, Animus Travels here. This is true late-breaking news that's been going on for who knows how long. Definitely before 10 o'clock this morning on CBS about Iran's bombing a
attempt to try to get Iranian officials and also
U.S. military installation
to broker this meeting. Speaking with the president at the G7 summit, we know that the president
in that area.
His trip to the G7 summit in Canada abruptly. He traveled right back here to the White House, and every day since then he has been meeting with his national security team and his advisors, going over any potential threats to the United States and also the next movements here. But again, the president was very clear about this. In addition to not only warning Iran not to retaliate against the United States, we also heard from the president on social media just yesterday talking about the possibility of regime change. The president saying that it's not politically correct to use that term, but he went on to say that if the Iran supreme leader cannot make Iran great again, why not consider regime change? I had a chance to speak to the White House press secretary earlier today, and I asked her, what did the president exactly mean by that? Is he calling for the United States to get involved to accomplish that? Is he calling for Israel to get involved to accomplish that? Or is he talking about the Iranians? And she was very clear with me that the president was speaking about the Iranian people, saying that it's up to them to decide if they want to rise up to tackle that regime if they don't come to the table for diplomacy. Diane.
Rachel, thank you. And I want to go back to you because we're now hearing the first reaction from Israel to this attack.
Yeah, that's right. This was a spokesman for the chief spokesman for the Israeli Defense Forces, Efi Defrin, General Efi Defrin. He was asked about Iran's attacks on U.S. bases, saying that we're following developments that are being reported. We are in touch with our partners in the region. And of course, Israel regards this as more proof of the violence, that Iran is a terrorist state that threatens not just Israel, but the region and the world. We're also hearing from Bahraini state television that they have closed their airspace. The Interior Ministry in Bahrain, which of course is home to the US Fifth Fleet, had essentially issued an order advising people to stay at home. Now, no indications that anything has happened there, but it's just worth reiterating that the concerns about what just happened in Qatar are not just felt in that country, but I think throughout the Gulf region. But again, just to be very clear, we need to know whether any of these got through. A US official speaking to ABC News has essentially said that the Qataris and the Americans were involved in the shoot-downs. They're also saying that they don't think any of those projectiles landed in Al Udeid Air Base. Interestingly, Press TV, which is the pro-Iranian or Iranian government television, is claiming that they did land there, but no evidence of that.
And what more are you hearing about the way these missiles were intercepted?
Well, again, this has come from US officials. We know that the Qataris have basically US air defense systems, and of course the US base at Al Udeid has some as well.
And are other assets in the region as protected as this air base is, or are they more vulnerable?
Well, this is an extraordinarily protected air base because this is the nerve center, as we've been talking about, for U.S. Central Command. So we know that the attacks on the Iranian nuclear facilities, the flights would have been coordinated out of this base. So it's a very, very critical base. And of course, they don't speak to the security of other bases, but you can guess that this one is probably better protected than others. And that does raise concerns for other spots throughout the region. And we are just hearing, Diane, that there have not been any impacts with this attack in Qatar. We are hearing that they are not tracking casualties at this time. So certainly, I think many people are breathing a sigh of relief because the hope is that this will be contained and will not escalate further. But again, as everybody likes to say, the enemy does have a vote in that. And we don't, we have to wait and see how the Iranians calculate all of this, Diane.
And Rachel, of course, their lives at stake. There's national security at stake. There's also money at stake here, particularly when it comes to oil and gas prices. How concerned is the White House about that?
Well, it's something that the White House is obviously keeping in mind and folding into their calculus as they're evaluating this ongoing situation and also tensions in the Middle East. But of course, the primary focus from the president and the administration is keeping American lives safe. And so the fact that the target here was our troops, our air base, that could possibly prompt a very sharp response from the president if he decides to move forward. And after warning consistently and repeatedly against retaliation, it does put the ball now in the court of the United States to decide how forceful they want to respond, also possibly knowing that Iran could respond again. And this is the type of tit for tat that many Republican lawmakers and even some Democrats warned the president against. Yes, while the president has been adamant that he does not want to see Iran have any nuclear program or nuclear weapon, at the same time there was that campaign promise that he was going to be the mediator, that he was going to be the peacemaker as well. And of course, Diane, I will tell you, all of this comes amid ongoing questions about just how much damage the United States was actually able to do to Iran's nuclear facilities. We heard from the president saying that they were totally and completely obliterated, but we have heard from other members of the administration sort of distancing themselves maybe slightly from that language, maybe not being as strong when they talked about what actually occurred in that military strike, Diane.
James, what are other bases in this region now doing to try to prepare for possible attacks from Iran?
Well, they've all been told, Diane, essentially to shelter in place. And some of them are very, very simple indeed. A few years ago, I visited one of the smaller bases in northern Syria. Now, there are US forces in Syria and Iraq there as part of the effort to keep ISIS at bay. People will remember ISIS, the caliphate, once ruled an area that's governed a huge swathe of northern Syria and Iraq. Together with the United States and the Europeans and others, a coalition pushed those ISIS fighters back, decimated the caliphate, the Kurds on the front foot, fighting alongside Arab forces as well. But there remain pockets of ISIS fighters across Syria and Iraq, and they remain, and American troops remain in Syria to try to keep those forces try to keep ISIS at bay, but also advise the local government in both cases in Syria and in Iraq on basically how to police the region. And actually just yesterday there was a suicide attack in Damascus that killed over 20 people, and ISIS, the Syrian government claimed responsibility for that attack. So ISIS is still very much a threat, nowhere near the same kind of threat that it used to be, but it remains a serious dynamic in this part of the world, and that is why US forces remain. Now, they are more kind of vulnerable to attacks than other bases because these are just much smaller locations. We went to one of the bases in the north of Syria, and it was essentially just a large barn in the middle of a field. And yes, there will have been military installations around it, but this is not the kind of large air base that you may have seen pictures of in places like Qatar or indeed a naval base in Bahrain. These are much smaller. So these US service personnel are essentially much more vulnerable to attack. We actually saw that in January of last year at Tower 22 in Jordan, where US service personnel were killed by Iranian proxies there, and the US had to figure out a response, which was in the end striking their proxies in Syria and in Iraq. So these are much smaller bases around this part of the world. That makes them more vulnerable. They're also much closer proximity to the Iranians. Diana.
Yeah, they're not all as well protected as Al Udeid. James, thank you. And we're getting a look at some of the flight radar over the Middle East right now. Again, many areas in the region are bracing for possible retaliation from Iran. And the Qatari officials actually closed their airspace just shortly before Iran announced this missile attack on the Al Udeid air base. I want to go back to our Ian panel in Tel Aviv. Ian, where does this attack
So
now?
this is pretty much what's been going on lately this morning. So I hope everyone can
right now, it looks like a limited
be careful if you live in this in any of these areas.
Domestic audience one that will allow Iran to save face and say, look, we responded against America in retaliation for the strikes inside Iran. I mean, of course, the reality is that there is no equivalency whatsoever in volume and certainly not in impact.
Stay tuned for more.
I believe that any of those missiles that were fired or rockets that were fired into Al Udeid or elsewhere in Qatar were not intercepted at the moment. So this could well be a